What's up, friends? It's Scott Kumler, real estate coach and team leader. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the real numbers nobody tells you about when getting into real estate. If you're new or just curious what it really takes to get started, this one's for you. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. I've got more trainings coming that'll help you avoid the common mistakes new agents make. And if you want to talk about what a partnership with me looks like, text me at 623-387-2688 or schedule a Zoom with my calendar link below. Now let's get started. All right, guys. Now what I'm going to do is take you through the cost of being a real estate agent. Now what's really important to note is I'm licensed in Arizona. So I'm taking you through some Arizona pricing. If you live in a different state and are looking at getting a license in another state that's not Arizona, I definitely recommend taking a look at what your specific state requirements are and the cost there to being a real estate agent. However, these are just kind of common costs. So you definitely can kind of look into the exact same thing. Just take a look to see exactly what your state specific costs might look like. So also another thing that's important to note is that these costs are just estimates. They're not going to be the exact cost. Obviously inflation happens, people increase prices, reduce prices. There are a lot of different factors that go with these costs. This is just kind of give you an idea though, because one of the most common things I hear from real estate agents, especially once they get licensed, is they didn't realize how expensive it was going to be just to be a real estate agent, and they weren't prepared for that. And so my goal with this video is to just make you better prepared, so that way you have a better understanding of what it actually takes to be a real estate agent as far as the financial cost, because it's not as cheap as what people think it is. So first thing I'm going to talk about is the mandatory cost. Again, these are costs to getting licensed in Arizona, but these are mandatory costs. These are things that are going to, that basically just to have an active license, you're going to need to have anyways in order to become a real estate agent. So the first thing on this list is a real estate school. Obviously, in order to get your license, you have to take 90 hours worth of coursework and take a 6-hour contract writing class. And so there's a cost to that. Now, there's different schools out there, and there's also different levels of schools you can sign up for. For example, a lot of times, some real estate schools have like the basic plan, but then then they may also have another plan that's an upgrade, where if you want to go ahead and get certain learning materials, then there may be another plan as well too. But typically, if you want to go ahead and sign up for real estate school, you're probably looking at anywhere between $400 to $1,000 just to go to real estate school. And that's going to be your first step. And as far as getting your license is going to real estate school. Next thing on this list is the state licensing test. So typically most of your schools basically cover, or part of it is the school test you have to take. But once you pass the school test, you also have to take the state test. And in Arizona, the state licensing test is $75 per test. The reason why that's very important is it's very common for real estate agents to have to take the test multiple times. So I know a lot of agents that may have to take it 5, 6, 7 times. And so typically, as far as $75 per test, every single time that you have to take a test, it's going to cost you another $75. So that's not like a one-time fee. It's a per test fee is $75 per test until you basically pass the test. Now, like I mentioned, one of the hardest things about getting into real estate is basically passing the test. I think the test has like 20% pass rate. And so, it may take you a few times. And so that's just important to note, is that's going to cost you about $75 per test every single time you take it for the state licensing test. Next thing on this thing is the licensing application fee. In the state of Arizona, the licensing application fee is about $60. So that's something else. As soon as you pass the test, pass the state test, get through the schooling, all that stuff. Basically, you have to pay a licensing application fee in order to get your real estate license. Next thing on this list is a fingerprint clearance card. And also, in order to get your real estate license, you need to have a fingerprint clearance card. And typically, when you order your fingerprint clearance card, it costs about $70 in order to get that fingerprint clearance card. So, next thing on this list, which is typically things that no one ever really talks about. Like most people, when they get into real estate, they know about the real estate school, they know about the licensing, fees, all that stuff. But something else that typically gets missed, which is a pretty big expense, is the local board fees. So at least in the state of Arizona, every single market that you belong to, you basically need to join the local board. And all the fees are going to be a little bit different. For example, me, I belong to We Serve out here in the Phoenix area. And so typically whenever you join a local board, you're also going to have to pay local board fees. Typically in order to join a local board, the costs are about $400 to $700. It really kind of depends on what month you join in, because typically they'll prorate it, at least in Arizona, for the year. So for example, the entire year might cost just under $700, but let's say you join in June, then it might be prorated based off of what month you join. the board. So next thing on this list is the MLS fees. Every single MLS is going to have their own fees associated with joining it. I know the MLS that I belong to out here in Maricopa County, Armless, typically runs between $400 to $500 to join the MLS. So that's another cost, and these are all upfront costs that you would need to pay in order to become an active real estate agent. Next thing on this list is the monthly Super E-Key. So along with the MLS, every agent has access to getting an app on their phone, which is the Super E-Key. What that does is that unlocks the lock boxes and allows you to access homes. You have to be a licensed real estate agent in order to get access to it. And there is a monthly fee that you would need to pay in order to consistently keep your e-key. So the monthly fee is about $18 to $20 per month. To be exact, right now it's about 18. I think it's like 18.70 a month. But obviously this can go up over time as well too. So that's why I kind of just have a range of 18 to $20 per month. That's the only typically reoccurring fee from a mandatory cost. The final thing on here that you also want to consider is the brokerage startup cost. Most brokerages have some sort of startup fee, and those startup fees are going to always vary depending on the brokerage. So that's why I put down here dependent on the brokerage, but most do have some sort of startup cost. It's important to kind of take that into consideration when it comes to getting your real estate license, is that typically whatever brokerage you join, you're probably going to have to pay some sort of startup cost in order to join them, but does vary by brokerage. So some brokerages have higher startup costs. I've seen some that are as high as $1,000 to get started. Some are as low as like $100 to get started. So they're all different variations. So that's something that, especially when you're interviewing brokerages, that you're going to want to kind of take a look at. To get an idea, because these are all costs before you even start selling homes. So basically, these are all things that you're gonna have to pay for before you even sell your first home. And so it's important to understand those costs, because then that way you can prepare, save for it, and then be ready to go once you do officially pass your real estate test and are ready to get your license. Next thing on this list are needed costs to be successful. So these are things that are not mandatory costs in order to get started, to have an active license. You don't typically have to, like, there's no like you have to have this in order to be a real estate agent. However, these are things that typically you need to have in order to be successful. Now, all these things on this list have different variations. If you're like an independent agent kind of doing things on your own, these are typical things that you may have to pay for. But some brokerages do cover this. Some teams cover this stuff. Like, for example, I know our team covers all this stuff for all of our agents that join our organization. But if you're on a team that doesn't, these are typical costs that you may need to prepare for. And so one thing that's important, especially if you're a brand new agent and you're interviewing brokerages, you want to find out what of this stuff is being covered by the brokerage and which stuff you have to cover on your own, because these could be at additional costs onto you being you as a having you as a real estate agent. So first thing on this list is a CRM. CRM is probably one of the most important softwares that you'll ever use as a real estate agent, because what this does is it keeps your clients organized. It'll remind you when to follow up with clients. It'll also send out emails. It'll send out text messages for you and do all that stuff. There's different levels of cost for the CRM based off of what the CRM is going to do for you. The more activities it does and the better the CRM is, typically the higher the cost is. Typically the less it does for you, like the less the less it helps you, typically the lower the cost is. And there's all different levels of variation. So, but typically the average CRM is about $99 per month. So again, that's something else that you want to put in your budget, especially if your brokerage and team are not covering that for you. If you're a brand new agent and having to kind of do things on your own, that's something that you'll probably need a budget for in order to be successful. Next thing on this list, if you get any listings, then you're gonna need a lockbox. At least here in Phoenix, Arizona, if you were to buy a super lockbox from your local board, typically you run about $80 per lockbox. Obviously, the more listings you have, the more cost it may be. But obviously, that's something that especially as a new agent, you're probably going to want to be prepared for, because if you get a listing tomorrow, let's say you have a family friend that's looking at selling, fairly new into real estate, you're going to need to have a lockbox to put in the house. And so typically, if you were to pay for a lockbox, it's about $80 for a lockbox. For sale signs, So obviously, if you get a listing as well too, you're typically going to need to put a sign in the ground, and you need to have your own for sale yard sign. Again, different levels of variation. Different companies charge different things. But typically, if you were to buy a for sale yard sign, it can run anywhere between 50 to 60 bucks for sale yard sign. Most companies, they do have like a deals where you buy them in bulk. It costs it's a lot cheaper. So for example, let's say you're to buy 30 or 40 for sale yard signs, it might be only 20 or 30 bucks per sign. So it all kind of depends. But let's say you're just trying to buy, one or two signs in the beginning. Typically, you can expect to spend about $50 to $60 per for sale yard sign whenever you buy one. Next thing on this list is business cards. Obviously, you need business cards. Now, again, you might want to check with the team or brokerage, especially if you're interviewing brokerages and teams, to find out what they cover as far as business cards. But if you were to have to go ahead and pay for your own business cards, typically it costs about $20 to $50 for maybe about 100 business cards. Obviously, you don't need to continue to buy new ones unless you run out. Every single time it's about 20 to 50 bucks per business cards. Like I mentioned, there are some teams and some brokerages that will cover that. But that's definitely something that you want to ask when you're talking to brokerages, is finding out what they do cover if you were to join them. So final thing on this list, that's basically needed costs in order to be successful. Again, if you get a listing, you're gonna pay for listing photography and signpost installation. We use a company down here ourselves. The company that we use that does both of them charge about $150 to $200 for a listing to basically do photography and also install the signpost. Now, obviously, if you live in different markets, it may cost a lot more in order to hire a photographer, especially if you're doing a hire independent photographer. But that's typically something else that you're gonna have to budget for. So I definitely recommend doing your own research to find out, okay, how much would it cost to get the listing photography, and then also if you want to hire a company to install the signpost. Now there are some markets that are a little bit smaller that they may not have companies that will install the signpost for you, so you may have to go out there yourself to do it, or you may have to hire just like some independent person to go ahead and install the signpost for you. But the company that we work with out here in the Phoenix area does install the signpost for us, and so that's all included with the cost when it comes to the listing photography as well too. So now these are the costs that are needed in order to be successful. Like these are basically costs that in order to be a successful real estate agent, every single real estate agent should do and should spend money on if it's not already provided by your team or brokerage. Now, the final thing on this list that we're going to talk about are optional costs, but are highly recommended, meaning that you can get by without spending money on this stuff. However, if you want to be a top producing agent and be very successful in this industry, you're probably going to want to pay for some of this stuff as well. Now, again, some teams, some brokerages provide this stuff. So definitely as you're talking to different brokerages and teams, you want to find out, okay, what do they provide on this list versus what do they not provide on this list? What are things that they typically, that you have to cover yourself, so that way going into it. Again, our team provides all the stuff to all of our agents. So there's no additional costs or anything like that with our team. Now, if you were to basically, go to other teams, they might run their team differently, or the brokerage might run differently. So they might include some things, they may not include some things. So it's important that you're asking these questions when you're interviewing brokerages, especially as a brand new agent, to find out what are things that are coming out of pocket yourself that you're going to have to pay for. Because again, what I'm finding out from talking to a lot of real estate agents is they talk to brokerages and then they join a brokerage and then they weren't told any of this stuff and they didn't realize how expensive it was going to be a successful real estate agent. So again, optional but highly recommended. First thing on this list, open houses. I built my business up via open houses. If you were to go ahead and buy like one or two open house signs, typically it's about $80 to $100 per sign for an open house sign. Now, if you were to go ahead and buy those signs in bulk, it's typically a little bit cheaper. Now, with that being said, I'm buying aluminum signs, aluminum A-frame signs. There's obviously probably really cheap, like, stakes in the ground type signs. I'm not a huge fan of those, just because living in the Phoenix area, the ground's hard. And sometimes when we put signs out, we put them on, side rocks or gravel or things that it's harder to kind of go ahead and put the sign to the ground. So I prefer the A-frame signs because then it's less likely to get knocked over. So that's what I'm using. So you might be able to find some like really cheap signs as well too that are, just metal, stakes that you can just kind of stick into the ground, be a little cheaper. But the signs I buy typically are about $80 to $100 per sign individually. Now, if I buy them in bulk, for example, I just bought about 1,000 or 100 signs for the agents on my team. It's about $60 per sign at that point because I bought it for everyone and obviously everyone on my team's using it. So I'm able to get a little bit better deal when I'm buying in bulk. But that's something else. If you want to do open houses. Now, again, if you don't want to do open houses, that's not required. If that's not that's something you want to go ahead and concentrate on as far as your niche. But I do know a lot of real estate agents that typically focus on open houses. That's typically where a lot of agents like getting their business. And so if you were to decide that that's going to be your lead generation source, which was for me when I first got into real estate, typically you can expect to spend about $80 to $100 per sign on an open house sign. Now, with that being said, open house signage, especially if you haven't seen this yet, I did create a video on top 5 biggest mistakes that real estate agents make when doing open houses. The first thing on the list is not having enough signs. When I started off about 12 signs, but once I got over 20 open house signs consistently, that's when my open house traffic started picking up. So I talk about 80 to 100 signs. If you wanted to buy 20 signs, you're probably looking at, a good, $2,000 for 20 signs pretty easily. And so, that is important though, that you don't want to be cheap with it. You don't want to buy just 1 or 2 because typically you need at least 20 open house signs in order to really have a ton of success with open houses. Next thing on this list is the coaching program. Again, if you were to hire a coach, like, you wanted to go through a university, like, a training library that provides a bunch of coaching and material that's been proven to work. If you were to basically pay for a coaching program, it's about $1,000 to $2,000 to basically pay for a coaching program. Now that's not one-on-one coaching. That's just basically a coaching program where there's an online university that you can go back into and rewatch videos and stuff like that. Now within our organization, we provide all the online training to all of our agents, so there's no additional cost. So that's why I said some brokerages and teams might be a little bit different. We provide it to all of our agents, but if you were to go out there and say, I want to go ahead and pay for our coaching program, like most of the coaching program that we provide to the agents within our organization for free, there's a lot of other real estate agents out there that are not part of our organization that pay $1,000 just to get access to the training program. That's something else. Coaching and mentorship is probably one of the most important things when it comes to real estate, especially when it comes to coaching program. Typically a lot of agents will go ahead and waste a lot of time in real estate trying to figure it out on their own. But if you could go ahead and plug into a coaching training program, which basically tells you the exact steps, and then all you gotta do is follow the directions, you don't have to go out there and recreate the wheel. So even though $1,000 might seem like a lot to pay for a coaching program, it's highly important to do that if it's not already provided to you. And the reason for that is because otherwise you're going to be wasting a lot of time and money anyways figuring out on your own. It's probably going to cost you more than $1,000 just in time wasted, and so basically, I find it highly important to go ahead and get involved in find a coaching program that fits what you're trying to do in real estate. Next thing on this list is one-on-one coaching. Again, our team provides coaching to all of our agents. But if you were to basically hire a one-on-one coach, and for every single call that you have with them, typically you can expect to pay, at least from a high-level coach, $1,000 per call. I have a real estate coach right now that I pay for that, I'm in, coaching program I'm in. Every single phone call I have, every single 30-minute phone call, every single week is $997, right? And so typically, if you want to hire a coach and have a one-on-one coaching with a coach, typically you can expect about paying about $1,000 per call. Now, again, a lot of brokerages and teams offer coaching. Again, our organization, we offer coaching, and all the same people that typically pay $1,000 per coaching call for are all of our agents get for free when they join our organization because we provide that as part of being part of us. But if you were to want to go out there and hire your own coach and have one-on-one coaching calls, typically about $1,000 per call is kind of like the expected average that you can expect to see from a one-on-one coach, from a highly successful one-on-one coach that's done in this industry. There's a lot of people that might call themselves coaches, but they haven't actually done it themselves at a very high level, and they might be a little bit cheaper because they don't have as much value to provide as maybe someone that does provide a lot of value. But that's important to kind of note as far as the differentiating in coach as well too. And the final things on this list is transaction coordinator. Transaction coordinator is kind of like a back-end assistant for you, allow to basically help you throughout the transaction. Typically in Arizona, if you were to outsource it per transaction, typically about $400 to $500 per transaction in order to have a transaction coordinator help you with the transaction. I also think it's highly important to have a transaction coordinator, even as a brand new agent, just because there's a lot of things that you're not going to know. And so it's important to have a TC that's got a lot of experience to kind of manage that transaction for you. Also on top of that, it just saves you a lot of time. Typically the average transaction from someone that's very experienced takes about 10 hours per transaction to do transaction coordinating work. So if you were to go ahead and outsource that, that now frees up 10 hours per transaction that you can go out there and concentrate on doing money-making activities, which is basically selling more homes. So it's very important. Now, obviously, if you don't have a lot of experience in this this field, it'll take you a lot longer than 10 hours to kind of figure it out. And you also might make a lot of mistakes, which is part of the reason why it's good to have a transaction coordinator. But if you were to go out there and hire your own transaction coordinator, typically it's about $400 to $500 per transaction. And the final thing on this list is a listing coordinator. Typically, if you were to, get a listing and have to input everything in MLS for you, a listing coordinator inputs everything in MLS for you, and then they also will order photography and do all that stuff for you. So if you were to hire a listing coordinator, typically it's about $150 to $200 per transaction or per listing to hire a listing coordinator. Again, I think it's very important, because it takes away, they basically do a lot of basically activities that it's like data entry and the MLS stuff like that. That's not really conducive to your time, and you could be your time could be better spent going out there and finding more deals. So again, I always highly recommend hiring a listing coordinator. Again, some brokerages and teams offer that as a resource, so you definitely kind of want to take a look at that from a brokerage or team standpoint when you are interviewing brokerages or teams, especially as a brand new real estate agent. Like I said, our team personally provides all this stuff to our agents. But if you were to kind of go out there and have to do it on your own as an independent agent, these are typical costs that you might incur. Now there are a lot of other things that are not on this list that are also expenses, but because they're not on this list because they are very optional, meaning for example with lead generation, you can go out there and run Facebook ads, you can pay for realtor.com leads, you can pay for Zillow leads. There's other lead generation sources that will cost you money to go out there and do. It's also other marketing material as well too. But because it all depends on your business, there's plenty of things that when you first get into real estate, you can do that are free. For example, obviously it costs money to pay for open house signs, but you can do open houses for free. There's no cost to doing an open house. Same thing with, calling expired. It's easy to get expired lists. You don't necessarily need to pay for that stuff. Circle prospecting, you can get stuff from title companies and stuff like that. That's typically for free. But there are things for example, let's say you want a triple line dialer. It's not necessary. I've always used my handheld phone, my cell phone. I've never used a triple line dialer myself. You want to use a triple line dialer? You can pay for one. It's about $169 probably per month for a triple line dialer if you wanted to, but it's not necessary. All the costs that I went through in this list are all things that I think are highly important that you should spend no matter what when it comes to being a successful real estate agent. After that, everything else, it just kind of depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to do. Those are things that you don't typically need to spend to get started. But then as you become very successful, you can start adding specific activities onto your business that might cost money. But these are just typical. These last three slides I shared with you are just typically the kind of the basics as far as just getting started as a real estate agent. So now with that being said, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you do ever have any questions, or if you're looking to see what a partnership opportunity might look like with us over here at EXP, as being part of the Wolfpack, don't hesitate to text me at 623-387-2688. I'll also put my Calendly link below in the description, so you're more than welcome to schedule a free, confidential Zoom meeting with me, just to kind of see what that partnership looks like if you are already currently licensed. So if you guys ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out, comment below if you have any questions. I look forward to talking to you in the next video.